In 1954, James wrote that it was part of a column she wrote of the newspaper called A Woman's Place. She wrote about the Miss Universe pageant. She was a young working class mother at the time. She described her experience watching this beauty contest, expressing much the same sentiment that you heard in the late 60s of women's liberationists about the sexism of the Miss America pageant. What she said was, the contest was supposed to be not only for beauty, the MC kept saying, it was for poise and stature as well. But the most important outfit was the Catalina swimsuit in exactly the same style for each of the young women, end quote. Now, in that same article, she also said that although the contest was supposed, it's Miss Universe, supposed to be global, right? International. She noticed that the women paraded before the television viewers all shared the facial features of white American women. She says, as I watched the finals, it struck me that though the women were different types, every one of them looked the same. Of course, there was a type that wasn't represented at all. There was not one Negro woman in the beauty contest, end quote. So, just to kind of, summarize this, women in and around the communist movement were among the first to explicitly raise issues that got further developed when the women's liberation movement developed. It's also true that this same group of women were the first to raise the issue of lesbian sexuality as something to fight for in the 1950s. For example, the renowned playwright Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote Raisin in the Sun in 1957, she was also a member of the Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian organization in the United States. She published a whole bunch of letters. She signed them with just initials because she was worried about her privacy. One of her letters said this: "It is about time that half the human race had something to say about the nature of its existence. Otherwise, without revised basic thinking, the woman intellectual is likely to find herself trying to draw conclusions, moral conclusions, based on acceptance of a social moral superstructure that is never admitted to the equality of women and is therefore immoral itself. In this kind of work, there may be women to emerge who will be able to formulate a new and possible concept that homosexual persecution and condemnation has at its roots not only social ignorance, but a philosophically active anti-feminist dogma." So tying together LGBTQ liberation and women's liberation, which again, and I want to end by talking about how black feminist Barbara Smith, who really advanced the concept of interlocking oppression that led to the ideas of intersectionality, that when she was writing in the 1980s, she actually, paid homage to Lorraine Hansberry, saying, "I would like a lot more people to be aware that Lorraine Hansberry, one of our most respected artists and thinkers, was asking in a lesbian context some of the same questions we are asking today, and for which we have been so maligned." And that's just, that really represents, I think, what these writers and activists and, in and around the communist and socialist movements meant for the women's liberation movement. So in this talk, what I've done is try to challenge the accepted misconception that feminist struggle rose with the first wave and the suffrage movement, and after women won the vote in 1920, they lay dormant until the rise of the second wave of the 1960s. Most people would be surprised to hear that terms such as women's liberation and male chauvinism and even male supremacy were common in the socialist movement decades before the 1960s, and that those in the Communist Party during the 40s and 50s reached theoretical conclusions about these interlocking oppressions of race, class, gender, and sexuality that emphasized the multi-layered oppression of black women that later, Angela Davis would take up, and the Combahee River Collective in the 1970s and 80s. So the 1960s generation took up the mantle at that point and moved the entire project for women's liberation far forward, but they also built on the work of socialist women of previous generations. So instead of disparaging the socialist tradition, I think we have every reason to be proud to carry it on today.
Thanks, Sharon. So we're going to open it up for discussion. If you want to say something, ask a question.